Good morning and welcome to Kunsan Pile Children. we're, we're so happy to have you with us this morning for a teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. This teaching was given in 1991 and the title is Your Motivation for Kindness. And so we will begin.
My experience has been that when a new student comes to the center, it's at least a year before they actually can accomplish anything. At least a year. More, I would say. And the reason why, and the student will say, what can I do? What can I do to deepen? What can I do to really get into the swing of things? Sometimes I'll say, well, you can practice the shower of blessings, or you can do this practice, but I don't really get into the thick of it with them for some period of time. And the reason why is that the first year is spent really trying to absorb the idea that you must know something about yourself, that you have agreed to come here in order to change, that one must actually change one's habitual tendencies, one must actually change some of the focus of one's mind in order to achieve any good result, that you have actually come to change. That doesn't seem like a big realization. It would seem as though you would sort of understand intuitively that if you're coming to practice Dharma, you're coming because you want to change. You realize that there is something else that you can be doing. You can be achieving realization. You can be moving along on a path that is beneficial. But most people don't actually get that. They think they can come and do pretty much the way we treat conventional religion in this country, or the common religion in this country, which is to go once a week and that's it. You go once a week, and maybe a little bit more often than that. Maybe it's a social thing too. But that's not what Buddhism is. Buddhism is a science, really. It's a science of change. Most people know nothing about themselves. Did you know that? Most people know nothing about themselves. I have had students come to me for the first time, and they spend their first meeting with me telling me about themselves. And it is so far off the beam, you wouldn't even, if you had to match the dialogue with the picture of the person, you could never do it. Never. It is so far off the money. Most people don't know what they're good at, and they have no idea what their faults are. It's really interesting to see how people are. Many people will come to me and they'll say, well, I've always been spiritual, and I'm extremely spiritual, and I would just like to be involved in this path. And then later on, what you find out is that that person needs most and has actually come to uncover a tremendous amount of anger, in their minds. It is nothing. And then another person that might come. I have one student, for instance, who comes occasionally to me for some help, and he always says to me, well, I must not be your favorite student. I've taken a long time to really think about the Dharma, and I must consider things very carefully, and I'm also considering how I approach things, and I really want to examine the Buddha's teachings. I want to think about it very carefully, and it's hard for me to just jump on the bandwagon right away and become all enthused. I've known you for years, and I admire your work, and I'm not doing anything else. I'm really only doing this, but still, I feel that I have to examine things very carefully. Actually, he is one of my favorite students, and he doesn't even consider himself a close student of mine. He's one of my favorite students because his mind is so that he's very careful, very, very observant. very thinking, very relying on logic, very discerning. And so when that glorious day arrives that he says, yes, I'm a Buddhist, it's going to be meaningful for me. I'm going to be very excited about that. But there are students who will come up to me and they will say, oh yes, this is great stuff. It's so exciting. I just love this. Buddhism, gee, of course, I've been waiting for this all my life. And I go, yes, that's nice. Because I know that when they meet up with the hard work, it's going to be like paper burning, hot and fast and gone. So you shouldn't consider anything like that. Most people have no idea of what's going on in their minds. They really don't. And so anything that we can do as adults that will help us in that regard as well would be extremely beneficial. That if we can examine ourselves, if we can really be honest with ourselves and see that we have qualities that are not good. There are times that we are selfish. There are times that we are unconcerned with the welfare of others. Many times, most times. And there are times when we don't think things through. There are times when we simply react due to need and display a great deal of neediness without considering the outcome of that. There's very different, very many ways in which we are unable, really unable, to move effectively and productively through a spiritual path due to our own inability to see what we are. So it behooves us to study very carefully on these things. And one of the things that we should study on, which is the subject for today, is compassion. The Buddha teaches us, particularly in the Mahayana vehicle, of which this is a part, that we should be more concerned for the welfare of sentient beings than we should be concerned for our own welfare. And of course, if we really examine ourselves carefully, we understand that that is not a natural way for us to behave, is it? The survival of ourselves, the maintenance of our ego, this has always been, since time out of mind, our primary concern. Not only has it been our primary concern because it seems like the only realistic thing to do, according to what we have been taught about ego, but also we have the habit, the strong habitual tendency of preserving ourselves, of thinking only of the ego. That habit is so deeply ingrained that we actually do not understand how frequently we engage in that habitual tendency. We do not understand that we are always doing it. We don't know that. Now, you might disagree with me because you might think, well, gee, I was really kind yesterday. I was kind to my family, and I was kind to my friends, and I've been pretty kind this morning, and I was kind last week, and I gave some stuff away once, and then I'm generous at Christmas, and I don't know, I'm pretty kind. So you might think like that. But I suggest that you think again, because there are a couple of different things that you must consider. First of all, if you can remember when you were kind, then the only way that you can remember when you were kind is that by comparison to the other times, it shows itself. Which means that there has to be a hefty little measure of times when you were not kind in order for you to be able to compare the two. If we were truly bodhisattvas, if we were truly here solely to benefit sentient beings, that activity would be so all-pervasive and natural, we wouldn't be able to discriminate it. I would not know that I was kind. If someone were to say to me, "You're really kind, your whole life is kindness," I would go, "Really?" Because I wouldn't know. There would be nothing to compare it to. That's how interestingly, this kindness becomes a tricky issue, and this introspection particularly becomes a tricky issue. But beyond that, the kindness that we have exhibited, even if we do have to isolate it and explore it, we often find out is about us. It's really meant for us. It's all about us. It has everything to do with us, and for the most part has very little to do with anybody else. And that is a hard truth to face. But it must be faced in order to find the level of activity that the Buddha is talking about when he speaks of kindness toward all sentient beings. If we truly examine the way that we are kind, it can be a heartbreaking experience. It can be very, very difficult to observe. It starts with our decision to be a kind person. It's a bad place to start being kind, isn't it? When your decision is about being a kind person, at that point there is actually very little caring for the welfare of sentient beings, if you think about it. Because if what you set out to do is to be a kind person, then what you are trying to do is to find yourself, or to like yourself, or to discriminate yourself, to label yourself, to be yourself, to continue the continuum of egocentricity, of self-nature, to discriminate between self and other. One of the ways in which you can discriminate between self and other is to say, I'm kind, and you need me to be kind, or you're not. And so we find that our decision to be kind, it may be where we start, and I guess everybody has to start where they start, don't they? But at any rate, that's not where you need to stay. It is not a good place to stay. The Buddha teaches us that when we wish to embody the virtue of compassion, we should do so for different reasons entirely. When an ordinary person who has no technology of the path, who has no spiritual guidance or minimal spiritual guidance, or perhaps unenlightened spiritual guidance, decides that they want to be kind, they do so because they want to be a certain way. They want to present themselves a certain way. They want to adapt a certain mannerism. They want to embody certain characteristics. But it's all about them. They want to embody they want to be the embodiment of certain characteristics. But the Buddha teaches us when we actually decide to be kind, we should do so for very logical, really intellectual reasons. And they should sound something like this. First of all, we should study cyclic existence, the cycle of death and rebirth, and study it well enough to really see its faults. This is one of those painful things that nobody wants to do, because you have to think about birth and death. Cyclic existence is actually the cycle of death and rebirth, birth and death. And everyone who is born will die. That's one of the main faults of cyclic existence. Coupled with that main fault is that during the whole time that you're alive, until you start really aging or becoming extremely sick, you forget that simple fact. And you do not act appropriately. You do not act appropriate for someone who should know that fact. Even now, we're sitting here and we're talking, and some of us are aging, some of us are still youthful, but all of us are going to die. Do you think about that sometimes? We're all going to experience that experience of death. If we have experienced birth, we will most assuredly experience death. But even the way you're thinking now, not only the way you're thinking now, but the way you act the rest of the day, you will demonstrate that you're not thinking like that. You will act like a person who does not remember his or her own death. Because the other thing that we learn about our death is that when we die, we can't take anything with us. Not a thing. The Buddha teaches us not so much as a sesame seed. You can't even hold a sesame seed, stick it in your teeth somewhere, because you're not going to take your teeth. There's not a thing you can take with you. Well, actually, that's not exactly true. There is something you can take with you, and that is the condition, the karma, and the habitual tendency of your mind. That'll go with you. Now, knowing that, you know that you're going to die, and you know that you can only take the habitual tendency of your mind, the karma of your mind with you. Are you going to, the rest of the day, act appropriately? Are you going to act like you know that? No way. No way. And for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, what we are going to continue to do is to try to accumulate as much approval as possible. I'm going to make people like me. I'm going to make people proud. I'm going to get love. I got to find me some love. And I'm going to do anything I can. I'll lie, cheat, steal. I'll put on an act. I'll pretend. I'll mask my true feelings. I'll do anything just to get a little bit of approval. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little bit right now. Who cares if that creates the habit of grasping? Who cares if that creates the karma of insincerity? Who cares if I take only for me and don't much care what happens to anyone else? I want that approval. I want that love. That's what we'll do. Then the other is we'll try to accumulate material goods for no good purpose other than that we want them. And we'll forget. We can't take them with us. Not only that, but even before we get ready to go, they're probably going to fall apart. You ever had a car? My car is 3 years old now. Guess what's happening? It's always falling apart. I mean, it is meant to fall apart after 3 years. As soon as you get ready to pay off that loan, there goes the car. And that's how it is. It's not only like that with cars. Anything that you can have will rust, the moths will get it, it will fall apart, it will age. Anything that you can have will fall apart. But we don't act like people that know that. We don't act like people that know that. We act like people that believe in some kind of hokey fairy tale, you know? We act like people that believe stories that can't possibly be true. So the Buddha teaches us that what we have to do is to examine the faults of cyclic existence, and we must understand the faults of cyclic existence. Whatever comes up, goes up, must fall down. Whatever comes together, must separate. Think about that. That means that if you found the love of your life, you will also lose the love of your life. Who is born must die. All of these things are true, and these are the faults of cyclic existence. And to compound that, not only are these the faults of cyclic existence, which are inescapable, right up there with taxes, inescapable, but also we suffer from the suffering of suffering. We have the kind of mind. If we had a different kind of mind, we could see birth and death and birth and death, and our minds would be extremely stable and spacious, and perhaps it wouldn't bother us so much. Perhaps we would just go through this experience in the same way that, say, a marble goes down kind of a chute, you know, passes down a little, you know, ever seen those games where you put things together and you make marbles go down different chutes and through holes and under things and over things? Maybe our minds could be like that. Maybe we could just pass through, and it wouldn't bother us. But we're not marbles. Everything bothers us. Everything. Everything is something that we react toward. Everything. We react toward everything because it is the nature of our mind to react toward everything with acceptance or rejection, hope and fear. We are constantly revolving in hope and fear. And that also is the fault of cyclic existence, because while we are sentient beings in cyclic existence, we are experiencing both hope and fear, usually at the same time. Both acceptance and rejection, usually at the same time. And what must come from that is hatred, greed, and ignorance. We either hate something, or we want it, or we ignore it. These are the things that must happen, and that's the fault of cyclic existence, is that we engage in the suffering of suffering. We not only experience death, we suffer because of our reaction to death. We not only experience separation, we suffer because of our reaction to separation. We have the suffering of suffering. So these are the faults of cyclic existence. And this is why one would want to be a spiritual person, you see. Think about that. Your original purpose for practicing the path was because you wished to be a spiritual person. Eyes cast ever skyward, holy. Maybe you can even wear some robes and you can look really spiritual. Maybe you could do that. Maybe that was the original reason for coming to the path. That if you really need to, what you really need to do is to accomplish the foundational understanding that will allow you to continue on the path. And that foundational understanding is that you must understand the faults of cyclic existence. Because at that point, when you really understand the faults of cyclic existence, you understand for yourself there's nothing else to do. What else would you do other than practice the path that leads to the cessation of suffering in cyclic existence, or the cessation of revolving in cyclic existence? You could accumulate material goods. What good will that do? Or you could continue to develop the habit of being hateful. What good would that do? Or you could continue to grasp. What good would that do? Through logical understanding, you can see that it isn't about being a spiritual person. It's about that it's the only thing that makes sense. It's all that makes any sense. It's the only thing to do. Anything else you do makes no sense. And so, having that kind of intellectual, logical, foundational assumption, that particular understanding is like building your house on a solid foundation, like building it on a rock. To build it on emotion, the emotion of wishing to be a spiritual person, is like building a house on water. Not a good idea. The first hurricane or emotional storm that comes along, you're out. And that's the truth. I've seen it happen too many times. Now the other thing that the Buddha teaches us is that there is an end to suffering. The suffering of cyclic existence, the suffering that one experiences in cyclic existence. And the end of that suffering is to exit cyclic existence. And the end, in order to exit cyclic existence, one must achieve liberation. The Buddha teaches us that there is such a thing called enlightenment. That upon awakening to the enlightened state, one no longer revolves in cyclic existence, the cycle of death and rebirth, simply because one does not have the building blocks of death and rebirth. The building blocks of death and rebirth are based on the assumption of ego or self-nature as being inherently real and constantly revolving in the action and reaction phenomenal experience. That is what cyclic existence actually is. And through that means one actually creates the karma of death, creates the karma of hatred, of suffering, creates the karma of poverty, creates the endless experience cycle that we find ourselves in. The Buddha teaches us that to awaken to the primordial wisdom state, the natural state, one no longer accumulates that karma. In fact, all of that perceptual experience is pacified in that one finally awakens to and truly views the primordial wisdom nature. One awakens to the natural state. So there is an end to suffering. So when you become a spiritual person, if you become a spiritual person in order to be something, you're still clinging to ego, and you'll actually never attain enlightenment that way. It's a useless exercise. One can never attain enlightenment by wishing to be a spiritual person. One can only attain enlightenment by awakening to the primordial wisdom nature. And the Buddha teaches us that that can be done through the systematic pacification of hatred, greed, and ignorance, the pacification of desire, through meditation, through prayer, through contemplation, through study, through the pursuance of enlightened activity. There are many different ways. The technology is laid out. Now, we must understand from this point of view that it seems sensible and reasonable to wish to practice some spiritual path. It seems reasonable to wish to practice Dharma or some spiritual path in order to achieve realization. That does seem reasonable. Now, you must think about this. We've been trying to talk about compassion a little bit. Why is it reasonable then to practice compassion? Now that I've heard what she said, all I can think about is that I want to exit cyclic existence. I want to get out of here. I want out. I'm going to practice in order to achieve some realization and out of here, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm getting out. I'm going to achieve realization. I'm going to be a Buddha so I can get out of here. Well, and the Buddha teaches us another one of these miserable facts that we do not wish to learn, and that is that in cyclic existence, suffering is all pervasive. That means you don't have a corner on it. You're not the only one that has suffering. The Buddha teaches us that suffering is all pervasive and that all sentient beings are suffering. Well, you knew that kind of, didn't you? But you didn't really want to look at that because that implies that there might be something you'd have to do about it. So we didn't want to look at that too much. But then the Buddha goes on to say that there's one thing that we have in common. What is that thing? The one thing we have in common is that we all equally wish to be happy. We are all working so hard to be happy. We're hardworking people. Have you noticed that? Aren't we busy all the time? Don't we work really hard? Don't we try? When you evaluate what the heck it is we're trying at, we're not sure exactly what that is, but we try hard. I try hard, you try hard. I've seen sentient beings try hard. I remember when I went to India, I saw the simple people in India just scrape to get things together. You know, it's so hard to cook in the the traditional ways that they are used to. They don't have a gas stove that can turn it on, you know. And many people live in the streets. So hard to keep warm, so hard to keep cool, so hard to keep dry, so hard to keep fed. They try so hard. They work all the time. They're not lazy people. They work all the time. And at the end of the day, and at the end of their life, what do they have? Nothing. And we're like that. We're not so different from that. Even though we can turn on our gas stove, even though we have many things, many luxuries, we are trying very hard. And what we are trying very hard, that is exactly the same as the people that I saw in India, or any people, anywhere, or any sentient being of any kind, is that each of us is trying to suffer. And we are trying to be happy. That is our common brotherhood. That is where we are the same. Our humanity, our sentient beingness is such that we all equally wish to be happy. Yet we are all suffering. And the Buddha teaches us as well that in our nature we are the same. Now that's another one that's tough to swallow, because some people you like a lot and you think, yeah, I can see that they have the Buddha nature. And some people you think just aren't worth the gunpowder it would take to blow them up. And there are other people you wish would go away and never be seen from or heard from again. And there are other people that seem to be socially and intellectually inferior to you, don't you know? And there are other people that don't seem to be in the same caste that you are. You're ever so much higher than they are. And so we don't want to hear it, but the Buddha teaches us that we are all absolutely equal in our nature. Equal. Every sentient being that you see has within them the Buddha seed, the mind of the Buddha, has within them the potential to be Buddha. Many have attained Buddhahood. Not just one. Many have attained Buddhahood. Not necessarily the ones you see, but they have. And when you consider that each one of us has that same innate potential, you must follow logically and understand that at some point each one of us will be a Buddha. And at that point, who is to say what or who is better than any other? How interesting. According to the Buddha, then, we all, in terms of importance, significance, value, weigh the same. Weigh the same. That means men and women are the same, blacks and whites are the same, Rich and poor are the same. People of different nationalities, different religions are the same. Caterpillars and humans are the same. Yeah, they all have the same nature. Cockroaches, horses, cows, pigs, dogs, and humans are the same. Well, that's a prejudice you don't want to give up, is it? But according to the Buddha, all sentient beings are the same. We are equal. All sentient beings are equal. And we are especially equal in that all sentient beings wish to attain happiness. Now, think about this from the logical point of view. What would it accomplish to think only of your own happiness? Not only are we the same, but we are in our nature indistinguishable from one another. If we were to look at each other from the enlightened perspective, we could not determine where it is that you end and I begin. These lines are drawn up by ignorant minds. But in truth, Buddha nature is all-pervasive. So it doesn't pay to think of my benefit and not yours. What would I accomplish? What I would accomplish is to reinforce my ego. I would tell myself again and again and again that I'm somebody important and separate. It would not accomplish enlightenment. So logically, the Buddha tells us logically, we should work endlessly for the benefit of all sentient beings until they are free of suffering. Logic tells me that in this room there are many more of you than there are of me. So even though I'm not the most petite of women, still, you weigh more than I do, collectively. Therefore, I should dedicate my life to your well-being, not my own. That's logic. That's the only thing that makes sense. Isn't that different from cloaking yourself in this spiritual demeanor and saying, yes, I'm a very spiritual person? Or telling yourself that what you really want to be is a spiritual person? Or walking around very humbly going, oh yes, I'm a very spiritual person. Watch me act spiritual. Am I acting spiritual now? I'm acting like a person acting spiritual, aren't I? And that's the way it is. These are not the reasons for practicing. Kindness is not such that we're doing anybody a favor by practicing it. Did you know that? When people will come to me honestly all the time in consultations, and they'll say, well, I understand this idea about compassion, and you're saying that the Buddha wants us to practice compassion, and that's all well and good, but I don't feel particularly compassionate. I don't have that kind of feeling. I just don't have it in me. I'm selfish a lot. And my answer is always the same. Welcome to the world. Did you think you're different from anyone else? We're all like that because it is our habitual tendency. And so where you begin to change that habitual tendency is by intellectually examining the information that I've just given you now. And there's more information. This isn't it. But the information that I've given you now, intellectually examining it and beginning to create a new activity pattern based on that. When you come to the realization that kindness isn't a favor that you're doing anyone, or kindness isn't something that you do when you want to be a good person, but that kindness is logically the only thing that makes sense. When you come to that realization, your habits will begin to change when you see the sense of it. You sort of get into the habit of reminding yourself. You can do that. You could say, you can act your usual meanie self, and then you can say, oh, this isn't getting us anywhere. What is this doing? What is the point? You can develop the habit of saying that to yourself. And that's where it starts. Little by little, you change the habitual tendency of self-absorption and begin to act in a compassionate manner. You'll know you have it licked when you don't remember whether you've been compassionate or not. When someone can say to you, that was so nice of you, you're so kind. And you can think to yourself, well, what else would I have done? That was the only thing to do. Then you'll know you're really getting it. Or when someone says, you do so many things for others. Do I? Let me think about that. That's when you're really getting it. But there's one thing about compassion before we finish today that we have to remember. It's a very interesting aspect of compassion. And it's based on the fact that all sentient beings do, until they really learn the logic of loving, until they really learn the logic of the Buddhist teaching, of compassionate activity, of renouncing cyclic existence, until they really learn that, all sentient beings act with a little hook on the end of their activity. You'll know what I'm talking about when I describe it. Have you ever had someone do something nice for you and there had to be a payback? You know what I'm talking about. Have you ever done something for someone else and expected them to do something back for you in return? Sure, absolutely. Have you ever done something for someone else and waited for them to acknowledge how nice you're being? Sure. Have you ever been a good mother or father and waited for your children to tell you so? Have you ever acted really nicely and kindly and gone out of your way for someone else, or displayed some kind of wisdom or generosity or something like that, and just thought to yourself, damn, I'm doing good? Have you ever done that? All sentient beings do that. Please admit that to yourself, if not to me. All sentient beings do that. In fact, the Buddha teaches us that everything a sentient being does has a little hook on the back of it, and the hook is I, me. It's always about me. So you have to watch out that when you're being kind, you're not being kind just to be a certain way. What you really want to do is to alleviate the suffering of sentient beings. It's about them, not about you. Get that all sentient beings are suffering. Get the big picture. Get that they don't wish to suffer, that like you, they are exactly like you. They have the same feelings. They do not wish to suffer. They are running 100 miles an hour away from suffering, trying to escape. You must absorb that information and really figure it. You must, for that reason, alleviate the suffering of sentient beings. In order to do that, you have to examine the suffering of sentient beings. What is the suffering of sentient beings? It's the same as yours. Yes, it seems that some are suffering because they're hungry. So if you can feed them, feed them. Yes, it seems that some are suffering because they're lonely. So if you can be with them, be with them. It seems that some of them are suffering because they're sick. If you can heal them, heal them. But you may not be able to do any of these things for any length of time, and you certainly won't be able to do these things forever. In the end, they will die. In the end, you won't be able to follow them into the next rebirth. There's only one permanent way of ending suffering for them as well. And that is for them to achieve enlightenment. For them to exit cyclic existence. There is temporary suffering. And that temporary suffering is the suffering that is easy to do something about. You can give food, you can give money. But to permanently alleviate suffering, one must bring about the result of enlightenment. Literally, sentient beings, all of them, no matter who or what they are suffering for the same reasons that you are. They are revolving endlessly and hopelessly in cyclic existence. So the Buddha teaches us that we can do for others what we must do for ourselves. We can help to bring others to a state of understanding where they can begin to practice the path in order to exit cyclic existence. We can help to propagate the Dharma. Now, it's true that those of us that are just beginning to learn are not qualified to teach Dharma. You should not think that you are. You should not think that what you've heard here, you can go and teach it now. It's not like that. But you can help others to understand the value of kindness. You can demonstrate it. You can make an impact where you are in your small circle. You can begin to show people the value of being useful toward others, of being of benefit to others. You can begin to show the faults of selfishness. You can help people to understand in some simple way that there is something better than the superficiality that they are revolving in. You can pray for their enlightenment. One of the practices that you can do right now without any training is you can walk around the stupa, which is that white structure out there, and in a clockwise direction, because that stupa is empowered in such a way that it will benefit anyone that makes prayers there for the benefit of others, and it's actually considered to be a wish-fulfilling jewel in that it will help to realize those prayers, help prayers to come true. So you can walk around that stupa and you can make prayers that all sentient beings will be finished with suffering. You can do that now. You are equipped and empowered and ready to do that. Make prayers for the end of hunger. Make prayers for the end of war. Make prayers for the end of suffering in all of its forms. Pray that the depths of cyclic existence will be emptied, and that all sentient beings will awaken to their Buddha nature. You can do that. And in doing that, you've actually entered onto the path. It's just a baby step. It's a good one. And that is one thing that you can do quietly in your heart. No one ever sees it. You can do it without expecting anyone to pay you back. The Buddha teaches us that we should be kind in ordinary ways, to the degree that it is possible, but that we shouldn't have a charge on that kindness. It shouldn't be about us. It shouldn't be about being a kind person. There are many people that exhibit what I would call idiot compassion, and that is that they try to discern what looks kind in any given situation, and they try to do it until it drives everybody around them crazy. It's almost like the joke about forcing an old lady across the street because you want to help her, and actually she didn't want to cross. You know, it's kind of that kind of image. You don't always know what's best for other sentient beings. And sometimes harshness can be the kindest thing that you can do. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen a person just whine and whine and whine endlessly about their troubles, and they're so consistent about their grasping and whininess, and they drive everybody crazy, and what they actually do is succeed in alienating everybody around them? Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to say to them, "Cut it out! You're driving everybody nuts!" Sometimes that can be the kindest thing to do. So Buddhism, you shouldn't have an attachment to being a kind person in some way that you can demonstrate to others, but instead you should think, what will end suffering? That should be what it looks like. What will end suffering? What will really do it? So, the upshot of all of this, then, is to consider compassion in a new way, in a sense to consider it in an ordinary way, in that you can truly practice it within the context of your life, but more than that, if your practice is compassion, or whatever you wish to do in terms of traveling on a spiritual path, and particularly on this path, know yourself. Examine yourself. See what your motivation is. Motivation on this path is everything. It is everything. And even beyond that, examine the faults of cyclic existence so that when you accept the hard work of this path, when you accept any aspect of this path, even if it's just the simple acting in a compassionate way, no matter what it is. Accomplish whatever you do spiritually for the right reasons. It must be the right reasons. Take into yourself the fundamental truth that cyclic existence is faulted, but that the good news the Buddha gave is that there is an end to suffering, and it is attainable to you if you're open to your eyes and act appropriately and accordingly. Don't waste your time gathering onto yourself things that you cannot take with you. Don't waste your time. Practice the path.
I'm just taking the black table.
Mhm. Thank you so very much for joining with us today. We're happy to share this teaching with you, and we hope that you enjoyed it. Let's see, where am I? Just wanting to let you know what all is going on here this week, and you've probably heard all over the lines about how often we do all of these teachings. But let me tell you about today briefly, because today is Sakadawa. It is Sakadawa Duchen. It's part of the month of Sakadawa. And in the Tibetan tradition, this is the month where Buddha Shakyamuni attained realization. He was born, he attained realization, and passed away. And also there's some other miracles that happened during the same month. So it's a very, very sacred month, and everything is multiplied during this month, but particularly today, which is the day that's credited with his birth and his enlightenment. And so today we'll actually be doing some extra practices. We'll be doing a second soak at noon. No, sorry, it's almost noon here now. At 1 o'clock across the street, it will be a Tara soak, and you'll find that on the calendar on tara.org. So you can look there and see the calendar. And also we'll be doing the Rigs and Dupa at 2 p.m. These will be live. If you're in the area, please come. And then, because after that at 4, Jetsunma asked for a totem to be built. And I guess basically sort of honoring the sacred. So anyway, it's very, very interesting. It's really different. You can see a picture of it on the website on the latest post. And but anyway, at that totem, they're going to be doing a short dedication for it. And then the drum circle will be on that side, this side of the street, as opposed to over by the Guru Rinpoche statue. So come and hang out with us. We're drumming for rain and chanting the Tara mantra. So a lot of Tara today and a lot of Guru Rinpoche. So all good. We hope you can come. And it's good heavens. I think this is not the post that I intended to do. But oh, good here. Okay. Oh, I'll take it over there. Okay. So anyway, so thank you very much, and we will see you next time. Have a great week.